Hello and welcome in to another episode of the Fantasy Football Forecast. I'm your host, Trevor Scott, joined by my co-host, Matt Giraldi.
What's going on, guys?
And today we are going to be getting into Week 5 Beat the Waiver Wire, right? So these are guys that are looking better for Week 5 or moving forward. There has been so much injury news. So if you have IR spots, as these guys start to go out, you're going to be able to move them onto your IR slots. You should have some roster spots freeing up late in the week. And so this video is targeted at who you can add that could help you further down the line. So if you need somebody this week, obviously, just go kind of to your waiver wire or go to the waiver wire videos if anybody's still available. These guys are more looking forward on guys that we think could have upside or could be waiver wire ads in the future that you could get cheap now that could be worth more in the future. And again, we just want to plug our rankings. So if you are listening to this and do want our rankings, comment below to get our rankings and we will get those sent out to you. First guy we're going to start with at the quarterback position is Jameis Winston. So we've mentioned him a few times in the waiver wire videos, especially from a SuperFlex perspective. But Deshaun Watson currently has the second most pass attempts in the league and the 26th most passing yards. He is been terrible through the air. And it's been bad for the passing offense in general. I know David Njoku's been out, but Amari Cooper obviously didn't get it going through the first 2 weeks, much better in week 3. But I do think eventually they're going to have to turn the keys over to Winston because the offense is kind of grinding to a halt. The coaching staff, even with Watson, had to sit down and try to see if he would be more open to additional running plays, moving the pocket, more read option. And Watson kind of was just like, nah, I'm good. I didn't get brought in or paid to do that, which is an interesting take because he was one of the best rushing quarterbacks with the Texans. So I think there's additional building tension there with the coaches in the locker room there. Obviously, everybody loves Jameis Winston too, right? I mean, it's hard not to love the guy when he's just out there being a goofball, being himself. And so I do think that there's a worthwhile add here in deep Superflex leagues, or if you're just looking for a high upside quarterback struggling at that position, right? I might almost rather have Winston than, say, for example, Will Levis at this point. If you need a starter or you're starting Levis type of thing, maybe, or bye weeks coming up that where you need a quarterback, say you have Goff, you're not going to be dropping Levis if he's your option for next week, for example. But overall, I do think that Winston is going to start creeping up the rest of season rankings here because I do think Deshaun Watson is going to get benched. And also, if you have Watson on your team, you should probably be adding Winston before somebody else in your league does.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I was going to make a point about how Deshaun Watson's probably the most disliked player on the team, and Winston is probably one of the most liked players on the team. We've seen his ability to just galvanize a team, throw for 1,000,000 yards. We know that he's going to throw picks, but we know that he's going to definitely elevate his receivers a lot more than Watson is currently. So I know we've talked about some of these guys as trade targets before, but try to get Amari Cooper on your team because if this does happen, he will explode.
All right. And at running back, we have a guy for the Broncos, which is probably not going to inspire a lot of confidence from you guys, but we do want to mention Tyler Badie here because there's not very many situations without an injury where somebody else can kind of take over as the starter. And the Broncos have been so bad on the ground. Javonte Williams is just not getting it done. He gave up goal line carry to McLaughlin last week. I don't know. It was kind of just this weird thing. And then, they were winning by a lot actually last week, which was kind of interesting. But after the game kind of got out of hand a little bit, they let Tyler Badie take over in the backfield, and they gave him kind of all the snaps on the last couple drives, and he carried the ball 9 times for 70 yards. That is not something we've seen from either of the running backs ahead of him on the depth chart. And so to see him perform so well and gain so many yards in a way that the Broncos offense just doesn't at this point, I think was very interesting to see. He didn't get anything in the passing game. And I don't think they were really looking to pass at that point in the game. And he was being so effective on the ground that they kind of just kept giving it to him. So I do want to say that this is somebody that, especially if you have one of the running backs for the Broncos on your team, you have extra bench spots, you have a deep roster. This is somebody that I would try and get. He's only 3% rostered. But again, just take a shot on him, put him on your bench. If he does nothing this week, you can always just cut him for the waiver wire pickup next week, right? But this guy is somebody that could currently take over as the starter. We kind of recommended Roschon in this or Khalil Herbert in this role last week because we were seeing this with Chicago, kind of the backfield tide changing. And we think in Denver, that's kind of happening as well.
Yeah, so Javonte and McLaughlin are each averaging 2.2 yards per carry, which is horrible. Badie actually leads their running backs in rush yards with 86. I had to double check this, but Javonte and Jaleel have combined for only 92 rush yards. So you know their inability to run the ball effectively is just having Sean Payton pull his hair out. So I think, Badie this week has a tough matchup, obviously, against the Jets. So you're not starting him. However, he has the Raiders in week 5. So if he does take over and kind of assumes that number one role, he's in a decent spot week 5. And we know week 5 is the first week where you're going to have players going on bye. Maybe you've got like Gibbs or Montgomery and you're kind of in a pinch. There could be worse options than him out there.
Moving on to the next position at wide receiver here is Xavier Legette. So we've seen a lot of these rookies that were drafted this year be successful. And this might be Legette's turn here, right? Dalton obviously elevated the offense overall. We've talked about this a lot this week, and we talked about it even going into week 3. But at this point, with Adam Thielen going on injured reserve, I think there's an opportunity here for Legette to kind of step into that number 2 option in the passing game. So, if his talent starts to shine through, remember, he is a first-round pick, and there's a chance here that he can be more involved than the 3 targets he got last week. If that goes up to 6, up to 7, in a high passing game against the Bengals, beatable secondary, he's going to be getting number 2 coverage because Deontay is going to be seeing the number 1. Maybe there's something here where it kind of gets going at this point in the season. So we did say early in the year that Legette was the rookie that we would probably be the most comfortable cutting. But at this point, I think this is where you should go back to him, or if you've held him, or if you have him in Dynasty, be looking or raising your expectations here. And if you need a wide receiver, you could do a lot worse than adding Legette to the end of your bench.
Yeah, and I love Xavier Legette. I think he was probably the most polarizing receiver prospect heading into this year's draft. I personally had him 6, and apparently Carolina agreed because he was the number 6 wide receiver off the board. People of this size and strength are not supposed to move this way. He runs a 4.39, but he's one of those guys that seems to speed up the further he runs. He hit like 22.4 or something miles per hour on a play last year against Mississippi State. If you haven't seen that play, it's actually hilarious how far the defenders are behind him. Going back to how much more efficient this offense looks under Andy Dalton, I think there's a good chance that he steps forward. They almost connected on a touchdown last week. Legette just unfortunately wasn't able to get that second foot inbounds. But, I was watching an interview that he did earlier this week, and he was talking about, he and Andy Dalton in practice really working on connecting on that deep ball and having a good chemistry. So he is still kind of getting up to speed, with an NFL offense, but I think now he's going to be kind of thrown into the fire. So if he can get that target rate up to like 6 or 7 per game with his athleticism and ability to break away from anywhere, I think we could be looking at a potential high upside flex play heading into bye weeks.
Next name we have here, another rookie receiver, right? Another guy that maybe is getting going a little bit more. Is Luke McCaffrey. So rookie for the Washington Commanders. He has seen his snap share decrease each of the first 3 weeks, right? 61 to 56 to 34. But they were not in a ton of 3 wide receiver sets this week. And he did have a 30-yard reception against the Bengals. He had 3 for 45. So, a little bit more involved, getting the ball a little bit more. And we've talked about him as a project just in general, right? As hasn't played a lot of receiver yet in his career, drafted in the 3rd round, high upside player. And they get the Cardinals this week, who they should be chasing points, and there's no Eckler, so that's going to help possibly get him on the field more this week without that kind of pivotal weapon out of the backfield in the passing game. And so, again, another guy that if you're in a deep league or you want to add somebody to the end of your bench just as a speculative ad in a passing game that looks like it's ascending, Luke McCaffrey is your guy.
Yeah, I think the most important thing you said is the passing game ascending, right? We were kind of down on Daniels the first 2 weeks. Obviously, he did not look good as a thrower. He was rushing quite a bit, which was still fine for fantasy. But as a receiver, you definitely need your quarterback to be throwing the ball well. And it seems like Daniels, at least last week, that sort of clicked for him. So I think he continues to make that step forward. Obviously, Terry's the number 1. He's going to be getting those deep shots. But I think if they want to continue to make the game easier for Daniels, They'll have some quick slants for McCaffrey, and with his athleticism, we saw him almost score on that play that you mentioned last week. So I think he's going to continue to ascend on this offense.
Yeah, tackle with the one, man. It would be a lot easier to recommend him if he had been able to get in. Robinson scored on the next play. But yeah, overall, McCaffrey's just a great ad in general. I mean, he's fun to root for. And he's only going to get better. He's a very talented guy. So another guy that you might want to just put the watch list on too, right? Just make sure you keep an eye on him. Maybe don't add him yet because he's a guy that if you add him, you could put him on your teammates or league mates' radar. So, keep that in mind for sure. Legette is somebody that I would definitely try and add over McCaffrey at this point. But, overall, second half of the season, I have really high hopes for McCaffrey. Next guy we're going to talk about, going down to the tight end position, is Erick All. So we're sticking with the rookie pass catchers here. Going to another rookie for the Bengals. Back-to-back weeks of 4 catches, and that's operating as the number 3 tight end within the offense, right? He's playing less snaps than Mike Gesicki and Drew Sample, but his target share and target on his routes is very high, which I think is an interesting commentary here that as the season goes on, definitely another guy you want to keep your eye on, because if Gesicki starts to fade away, or if they just decide that they're going to start getting their rookie more and more snaps, I do think that there's talent level here, and he's getting open clearly. He's able to command targets, 4 targets on only 21 snaps this past week. So that's quite a bit of attention for when he is on the field. So again, not somebody that you're going to be necessarily scooping and starting this week. This is a long-term play at tight end. And, we've seen second half breakouts for a lot of these rookie tight ends over the last couple of years. Laporta, not so much. He was kind of good right from the beginning, but even last year we saw second half breakout from Kincaid, second half breakout from McBride. Not predicting anything like that, but if he does take over the number 1 role, if he does start playing 58 to 70% of the snaps, this is somebody that could ascend into an every week starter.
Rookie tight ends out of Iowa, man. I mean, you got Kittle, Noah Fant, TJ Hawkinson, Sam Laporta, now Erick All. Maybe it's crazy what they do up there. I mean, he led the Hawkeyes in receiving yards last year, playing only 7 games before tearing his ACL. Not that Iowa is a juggernaut offense, but I think that still kind of speaks for himself. I think you hit the nail on the head with guys like McBride, with Dalton Kincaid. Targeting a young, athletic, specifically tight end is, I think, kind of a low risk or a no risk investment off the waiver wire. You were correct in saying, he's not going to be a plug and play starter right away, and you're going to have to be patient with them. And tight ends take a little bit longer in their development. But, Joe Burrow earlier this week was praising his development and his ability. So I think that's a good sign. The coaching staff seems to love him. On the national broadcast, you hear the announcers talking about the potential of Erick All for the rest of the season. So I think this is someone to definitely put on your watch list, and has a good future ahead of him.
And the last, or maybe we'll mention both, but the last position we're going to talk about here is DST. So next week, if you do have an open roster spot, it's always a good idea to get ahead on the defenses, specifically so you don't have to spend any fab to get one of these guys. But the Broncos DST goes up against the Raiders in week 5, and they're at home. And I do think that that's a good matchup, especially if Javonte is still going to be banged up. The Raiders have not been able to get anything going on the ground themselves, and that's kind of where the Broncos are the most vulnerable. If it is Jacoby Myers going up against Patrick Surtain, it's going to be like Bowers and Trey Tucker trying to carry this offense. So the Broncos have had 2 double-digit scoring weeks so far. They put up 11 against Seattle. They put up 17 against Tampa Bay. So I do think overall that they can continue to score and be relatively productive from a fantasy perspective. And I do think that they could be very good in week 5.
Yeah, that's a good point about Davante Adams. Obviously he's not going to be playing this week, unfortunately, but with Surtain and them being a good pass defense, and Raiders cannot run the ball to save their lives, a home favorite in this game, I think that's a matchup that you're going to want to exploit.
Yeah, then the other DST I wanted to mention really quick, not that they're necessarily available in your league, but they are 39% rostered on Sleeper, is the Seattle Seahawks. They started off strong as well. They had 12 against Denver. They had 13 against Miami last week. They get Detroit this week, so a lot of people probably dropped them. But they do get the Giants in week 5. We were talking just before this. I'm not sure the Giants are the best matchup, but Seattle's defense is just really good overall. They have been the toughest defense against the pass so far, and their rush defense hasn't been terrible either. So I think overall, this is a good defense. So if you want to pick them up for the Giants in week 5, say that somebody already got the Broncos or something like that, they're another option for you in Beat the Waiver Wire.
Yeah, I would expect Seattle to be up by quite a bit in this game, which is kind of force Daniel Jones to throw the ball a little bit more. I know he's played better football maybe the last couple weeks than we've expected, but we saw at the end of the game he still did throw that pick, and it is still the Giants.
Another thing with the Giants too, right? Pick up Seahawks this week. Follow the news on Malik Neighbors because he did suffer concussion. If he's not able to get right, I know they have a little bit longer week, 10 days to get him out of the concussion protocol, but if he does miss again, that's going to even just reinforce how good the Seahawks will be next week. And with that, thank you guys so much for watching. We look forward to talking to you in the next one.